So here we go.
Howdy, howdy.
Hello, hello. How are you doing?
Howdy. I'm glad to come around here.
So you guys can hear that, can't you? And you can see everything. You loved your Reich video. Thank you very much. I do greatly appreciate it. Obviously, the Robert Reich video. I felt he was rambling on quite a bit about the certain issues, but yeah, I got around at least most of the argument, which I basically covered in the first part of the video, I should say. But yeah, so here we go. Hopefully you guys can hear what they're saying. Okay, you guys can hear what they're saying. Like just listen. You guys can hear this.
Wonderful. All right. Well, you had you wanted to talk about planned market versus market economies, right?
I want to focus mainly on the economic calculation problem itself.
Right. So you can hear that, can't you? Just to get the go ahead with that. Yep. Okay. That's good. That's good. So what I'll do is we'll just start off with what they're saying, right? Because obviously you'll hear their argument. Just listen to this.
I have my criticisms of mainly centralized planned economies, but the economic calculation problem is terrible. First off, I think right off the bat, the way that Mises portrayed the initial situation in economic calculation in socialist commonwealth is basically, if I remember correctly, you have like, I may be misremembering, but you basically have to get goods from one place to another place, and there's like a mountain in between. And you can
and there's like a mountain in between. Do I know where they got that from? It was an example from a video that was posted by PragerU. In other words, all they were using was a prime example of the economic calculation problem. It wasn't Ludwig von Mises example. Ludwig von Mises obviously made the argument on the economic calculation problem. I mean, no question of that. But he's going on about a PragerU video and he doesn't even understand it. It's how sad that is, right? So here we go.
Either build through the mountain or you can go around the mountain. And the thing is that as far as I'm able to understand when it comes to economic calculation problem, you first have to ignore any other possible way to calculate anything aside from markets, which fits for the Austrian schools since they rejected using any kind of proof for their economic conjectures.
What's he talking about? I mean, there's mountains of historical evidence to back it. The economic calculation problem can be seen everywhere. It can be seen plastered all over the NHS with the resource misallocation. It can be seen plastered all over the history of the Soviet Union. I mean, that is how sad it is, folk. And I have to bring this quote up. And it was a quote by two Soviet Union economists in Thomas Sowell's book, on basic economics. And Thomas Sowell illustrates what both Soviet Union economists had stated. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly drag up their quote. So here we go, right? Here's the economic calculation problem in one, because all the economic calculation problem stems from price controls distorting the information of profits and losses, because they don't understand what prices are, right? They've not even got a clue what that is, right? And essentially, it basically stems from government price controls. And it leads to surplus waste problems because government ends up overproducing. It doesn't know how much to produce. Doesn't know where to allocate resources, because resources have alternative uses, right? So take for example wood. There's about 1,000,001 different products out there in the market. You need to know, take for example oak wood. What you're going to use the oak wood for? And with about 1,000,001 different products out there in the market, you're going to need to know, how much of it you're going to use and where you're going to allocate it in the market. It's no, something simple. I mean, you've got bookcases, you've got tables, and then you've got all the different styles. So it's not exactly something, overly simplistic like they're trying to paint it. So here we go. This is essentially a quote by Nikolai Shmelev and Vladimir Popov, two Soviet Union economists, and here's what they have to say, right? On quote, state purchases increased and now all the distribution centres are filled with these pelts. Industry is unable to use them all, and they often rot in warehouses before they can be processed. The Ministry of Light Industry has already requested Wisconsin twice to lower purchasing prices, but the question has not been decided yet, and that is not surprising. Its members are too busy to decide. They have no time besides setting prices on these pelts. They have to keep track of another 24 million prices, right? So here's the issue. Even if they wanted to try and, solve such a problem through price controls, right? Through fixing prices below market, or whether it's going to drive the price up, they're essentially destroying the information of profits and losses, right? Profits and losses is information that can only be gathered through consumer demand only. That's the only way you can gather it, right? Rationally. Because after all, what's the information? And it's just like Lawrence Southern, right? You're not even speaking about Marxists here. We're speaking about people who moved away from libertarianism, claim to be so-called conservatives, but don't even have a clue what profits and losses are, right? And how you can tell that, somebody like, for example, Lauren Southern, how you can tell she doesn't even have a clue what profits are. And I'll get back to it. The reason how you know for a fact that she's not even got a clue what profits are is because she stated something about the fact that, well, at the end of the day, capitalism would just destroy all the culture and heritage, but that isn't how capitalism operates. Capitalism operates on, profits and losses. And profits is basically information driven by the consumer. So if the majority of society are in demand of something, if the majority of society are in demand of protecting their culture or heritage or whatever, then that's what capitalism has to cater for, because that's where the profits are. Profits is information from the consumer's demand, right? Now people like this, they've not got a clue what profits and losses are. They just think it's just something that's a surplus that you fill your own pockets with, right? So you're not even speaking about Marxists here. You're speaking about, the common people of society, all these so-called conservatives. They don't even have a clue what profits are. And that's how bad it is, right? That tells you of how bad it is, right? So it's not just a case of this coming from Marxists, right? So that's all you need to understand, is the very fact that when it comes down to that, the whole thing of profits, that's what it is, right? So he's not got a clue what he's going on about. So just listen to what he says, right?
Mm-hmm.
And along with this as well, there's already been God knows how many maybe at the very least 5 solutions, definitely more, but at the very least 5 solutions to the economic calculation problem that...
No, there isn't. There is no. There's never been a solution to it. There's never been. And here's, just listen to this.
That basically figures out. The one I'm most familiar with is participatory economics. There's some other stuff from Lange, I believe. I may be misremembering, but that's as far as I'm able to understand. Well, Cockshot has recommended, I think, like some kind of cyber communism.
William Paul Cockshott, somebody who, by the way, if you don't know, had taught in Glasgow University, I think it was, right? Or I don't know what university it was in the early 90s, right? William Paul Cockshott was the same one that, I'm pretty sure his name is... No, it's not Redsky. I can't even remember his name. That's terrible. But essentially, William Paul Cockshott made the argument of a new socialism. A new socialism, in other words, he basically bastardised the entire meaning of socialism and tried to fit it around market socialism, which is an oxymoron, right? Because here's the thing, folk, and this is the argument with the market versus central planning, right? Take, for example, prices. What do you think the argument is when you're saying the market versus central planning? Well, when you're speaking about market versus central planning regarding prices, you're speaking about the market, which is leaving prices be to the laws of supply and demand, which is of course capitalism. And then you're speaking about central planning, which is, planning prices, which basically means controlling prices, right? That's what it means by the market versus central planning. What these socialists are trying to do is they're trying to bastardise the entire meaning of socialism because central planning didn't work, and now they're trying to bastardise it around that to do with the market. So in other words, they're taking something of capitalism and they're trying to relabel it as something socialism. That's essentially what they're trying to do, right? Because socialism's not about leaving prices be to the market. Never has been. That's no socialism. Socialism's all about trying to control the prices. That's essentially why the economic calculation problem takes place in the first place. That's it. So that's essentially the argument. Going back to his argument.
This type of thinking, and of course there's like the usual there's technology, we could probably plan better to do that, but just in general, the economic calculation problem within itself is like already just flawed simply because of the fact that they ignore basically anything else, and they don't really make an effort to really prove anything, which
that's not an argument. And the thing is, you'll hear it in a second where he tries to say that this is a good criticism. How's it a good criticism? It's just laughable. It's not even an argument. And to say that there isn't any evidence, what the hell do you think the two Soviet Union economists, two socialists, two Soviet Union economists were basically telling you what the economic calculation problem, that they were faced with? The moleskin pelts that were rotting away in warehouses. I mean, that is the economic calculation problem. How do we know that for a fact? Because the central planners were allocating resources into producing something that the market wasn't in demand of. Fuck it. That's evidence. You couldn't get clearer evidence than that. That is the economic calculation problem. That's what it means. Because resources have alternative uses. And it's like I said about that before, folk. Resources have alternative uses. Because it's like I say, take wood for example. I mean, there's about a million and one different products. You've got beds, you've got bedside cabinets, you've got fucking desks. What type of desk is it? Is it a computer desk? Is it, just some sort of workbench? Or is it, wood for the sake of some kitchen, work surface? All these different things, cabinets, you name it, right? Wood goes into producing so many different things, right? So, with that being said, that's what alternative uses means. Wood doesn't just have one use, right? And you're going to need to know how much to produce of each and every single option available. Because not all bookcases are the same. Not all bedside cabinets are the same. Not all beds are the same. I mean, this is how simplistic their worldview of everything is. They don't understand the complexity of everything, right? He's not provided an argument. He just simply says, well, at the end of the day, there's no proof. Well, actually, I've gave proof, I've gave evidence for two economists from the Soviet Union who gave their own examples, which proves they don't even understand what the economic calculation problem is. Here we go.
Which is kind of inherent for the Austrian school.
Okay. So I'm going to go over some of the few things you mentioned here. So number one, I 100% agree with you in all of the criticisms you made of Austrian economics, particularly their lack of proofs or empirics to back up their claims.
What? What do you mean the lack of proof? The proof is plastered all over every single mixed economy you could possibly find, never let alone Marxism. You can see it rife all over the NHS. The evidence is everywhere. And you can't point anywhere where you can't see it, it isn't there. I mean, how often have you seen governments overproducing and misallocating resources into the wrong parts of the market that the market's not even demanding? Too often. That's a common problem with the NHS and every public service you could possibly find. That's the true face of it. There's inefficiency because the control over prices. And, the evidence could be seen in countries like Venezuela, the most socialist economies, because of the fact that they try to control the prices. The evidence is everywhere. And you can see that, what led to the food shortage problems as a result of their price ceilings. And of course you could see the surplus waste problems through their price floors. I mean, unbelievable.
One of the things I mentioned when I went through the Wikipedia thing on the economic calculation problem was that I did very much disagree with the characterization of both, market economies and of, planned economies, although that wasn't really talked about a lot more, in the Wikipedia page specifically.
These people turn to Wikipedia like it's the Bible, folk. See, anybody who trusts Wikipedia for information on history or economics or just anything, right? They are basically robots. They're people who can't do critical thinking outside Wikipedia. And Wikipedia has been known for its Marxist propaganda. Believe me, it really has been. In fact, Wikipedia has been known for trying to delete and erase and rewrite history of anything conservative or libertarian. That recently actually came out to favour a Marxist propaganda to try and paint, something positive about Marxism. So I'm not bloody well surprised why he's turning to that Wikipedia for his information.
They mostly talked about, the characterization of market economies, and here they basically ignore things like market failures and adverse incentives.
Oh, here we go again, folk, right? See this nonsense that they speak, right? The so-called market failures they go on about, right? This is where these socialists go on about the boom and bust cycle, right? The so-called market failures. Was it a market failure when they tried to control the interest rates? No, that wasn't the market failure. That's anti-market. That's what you call trying to manipulate the market. That's what you call trying to intervene and control and manipulate interest rates. That failure led to the boom and bust cycle of the 20th century. That's not a fault of the market. That's a fault of your socialism basically trying to control the interest rates. That's what that is, right? And they've always got these baseless claims, and this is what socialists always do. They always play this game of, making baseless claims and hoping that the shit that they spout sticks. They prey on people who just basically don't understand the first thing to do with basic economics. That's essentially it. See, in order to be in a position to value socialism, and that is even within a mixed economy, is to be a person who doesn't understand basic economics to start with, who's never studied basic economics. Never. Honestly, never. See, if you were to actually study basic economics, you would see right through them. Because they don't have a clue about even the fundamental basics on prices. They've not even got a Scooby about all that stuff. It goes right over their head. You know, it's something that baffles them. And of course, I will get around to your comments as well, folk. You know, things are very well, mate. I hope you're keeping well. And as you say, the minor profit, basically what the guy is getting at is we have calculators in math now, so we can calculate now. But that's the issue, because you can't calculate, and he doesn't understand that. Seeing two people that have no idea what exactly, and the discussion on it exactly, they don't understand what profits and losses are. This is essentially what the problem is. They don't understand prices. You know, that is it in a nutshell. As you say, what Marxists, including those on the so-called right, fail to realise is that humans, as well, individuals, are self-interest. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, self-interest is part and parcel of human nature. That's another thing that they obviously don't understand. He's confusing responses to the economic calculation problem as solutions. Yeah, exactly. They don't even provide any solution, right? Because I'll explain just briefly here, and then we'll go on with his argument. The bottom line is, right, see when it comes down to the whole thing with their argument, they don't understand that William Paul Cockshott, who in the 90s or something like that was a lecturer at Glasgow University, right? Which, no surprise why, you know, our universities are breeding these silly Marxists, right? William Paul Cockshott tried to make an argument of a new socialism, trying to bastardise socialism around the market. And essentially what was argued by Mouth the Infidel in favour of William Paul Cockshott's argument, they're trying to say they can solve the economic calculation problem by then introducing consumers. But hold on a wee second here. Consumers driving production is capitalism. That isn't socialism. That's against the entire meaning of socialism. This is what I mean. They don't understand the first thing today with what socialism is and what it isn't. Socialism's got nothing at all to do with consumers driving the market. Socialism's got nothing at all to do with consumers driving what gets produced and what doesn't. Socialism is central planning. That's what defines it. The only people who try to bastardise socialism and try to pull it outside of central planning are socialists themselves. And the reason why they do that is because it's a concession to say they acknowledge socialism doesn't work. That's why they've got to try and, completely bastardise its entire meaning. This is essentially what they do. And that's why when you argue with a socialist, you're arguing with a brick wall. That's essentially it. Because the only way that you're ever going to know consumers' needs and wants, since society, take Britain for example alone, 65 million people, and 65 million people, each and every single individual all have, different needs and wants for each other. They're not all the same. We don't all have the same needs and wants. We're not all the same. So since we're all different from one another, then logic will tell you the only way that you're going to know how much to produce and what to produce is what the consumer dictates. And that's capitalism. That's leaving it down to the market to decide. Right? No, we might not live under a free market economy, but that element within the mixed economy is free market. Right? not to confuse, we don't live under a free market, but the element of number one, leaving prices be to the market is free market, and leaving consumers to drive what production is, that part's free market. So I hope that doesn't confuse people. The reason why we're not living under a free market as a whole is simply because your private sector's over-regulated by the state, etc, etc. You kind of get the point. So here we go. Just listen to what he says next.
And other issues that, you know, could be solved to some extent with like regulation and stuff like that, and also like advertising.
Now he says that very quickly, and this is body language, right? You guys might not be... I don't know if you guys are good at reading body language. I'm pretty good at, reading people's body language. It's just something I'm good at, right? The reason why he's saying it very quickly and mumbling is because he's uncertain of what he's saying, right? He's not too clued up, right? He's mumbling to try and skip past it, right? That's essentially what he's doing. What he was mumbling there and what he was basically saying is he's trying to say that government regulation can somehow be a solution to the problem. Why is that a problem, folk? Because government price controls is a regulation. That's what a regulation is. It's a regulation on prices. They're trying to regulate the prices. That's what causes the economic calculation problem. The economic calculation problem stems from government price controls, because they're trying to fix the prices above or below market value. You see what I'm saying? They honestly don't have a clue, folk. It really is humorous. I don't know if I've... Yeah, I read that comment and I read that one. Brilliant. Thank you for letting us know, DJ. What do you dislike about worker co-ops? Yeah, I mean, I could get around to explaining about certain things. It's not so much that I've got something against worker co-ops, folk, right? I've got nothing against the idea of people wanting to run a business, right? That's not the issue. The issue is that socialism is about communal ownership of property and the complete rejection of all individual ownership. Every bit of it. Right? No individual rights, no individual liberty, so you would not have the freedom to choose to leave a workplace and go work for somewhere else, right? That defies the entire meaning of what socialism's about. And that whole argument of workers' co-ops correlates to the oxymoronic ideology of libertarian socialism. There's no such thing, folk. Libertarian socialism doesn't exist. It's non-existent. There's no such thing, folk. I've gave reasons for that. Maybe I could speak about that at some point. But it's every bit as oxymoronic as this idea of market socialism. Because there's nothing libertarian about taking away an individual's rights and liberty. Nothing libertarian about it at all. And even if you were to ask them the question, once you've nationalised everything, how are you going to get the state to just wither away? Well, they'll never give you a straight answer to that question. And even then, if you ask them the question, oh well, once the state has just disappeared, how then are you going to stop people like me going and starting up my own private business? After all, there's no government there. So what you going to do? Well, that's it. This is where their mob mentality, their dictatorship comes into it. They form, this mob to start economically terrorising other people. How do we know that? Anarchist Catalonia. Immediately, as soon as the government collapsed, they formed their own government immediately following that. And they tried to say it wasn't a government, but it was a government. You want to know what that government was? A committee. That's essentially what their government was. It was a committee. And that committee was the one basically deciding and giving special privileged positions to, people who were let out of prison, and they got them to economically terrorise innocent people. And you saw it with the Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. You seen the violence. It's classic of socialism. The only way that you could hold it against them is having something like a HUD and a debate and not an argument, a reasoned, I wouldn't even call it a debate, in fact, because I was in agreement with the guy, and obviously you can watch the live stream, because I'll have that feed coming up with Matthew, where, the non-aggression principle, at the end of the day, that's the only way that you can really, have something rational there to hold them in place, because then you've got individual rights protected in law. That's the only way you can do it. So the only way that workers' co-ops can exist, capitalism. That's it. It's the only way it can exist. And are workers' co-ops really socialist? I beg to differ. I don't believe for a second that they are. They could call, this idea of workers' ownership of the means of production, but socialism's all about communal ownership. So they're trying to redefine socialism to fit it around that of the whole thing to do with personal ownership. That's the issue. So Rose Rist made a pretty good research document on the impacts of racism in the USA. About the economic views. Alright. Well, I'm not entirely sure about the other stuff, because I don't really follow into all that stuff to do with the racism and whatnot. Although there is the identity politics thing that I could go into, are fine if they are established through peaceful means. I agree with that. That's essentially it. And the only way that could happen is through a capitalist system, like I say. It's when they seized, that's the problem. Yeah, they are seized. Correct. That's correct. Also, worker co-ops, I feel, are going to run into the problem with production processes become capital intensive. That's, I suppose, a reasonable argument. One of the factors is capitalism. Yep. So I'll just... Righty, what wasn't a study that Vouch cited? Come from a study of the fascist co-ops in Spain. I'm not entirely sure in terms of the whole thing in Spain, but I'm pretty sure I've seen stuff about Mondragon and stuff before. Anyway, guys, well, let's just go on with this boy's argument, shall I say?
These are all things that were ignored in their characterization of market economies, and as such, it's a pretty good criticism there. However,
that's not a criticism.
I'm most interested in talking about is that, so ceteris paribus, assuming everything else is the same within an economy, right? Between two different nations, given that one of the nations were using a market system to allocate resources and the other one was using a command economy to allocate resources, which one of these do you think would allocate resources most efficiently?
Get this, laugh, folk.
And why do you think so? Because there is where I kind of like when it comes to constructing this in my head, like a model, like a logical model, it seems to me that market economies, then assuming just general economic production, not during crises, and given the level of understanding I have right now of the technology behind market planned economies, I feel that the market economies would perform better when it comes to effectively allocating resources there.
Dear God. The humorous thing about this socialist, Rose Rist, is the very fact that's a concession to basically say capitalism's efficient and socialism isn't. Because there's no such thing as socialism being anything else other than central planning. That's essentially what socialism is. That's what defines it, right? You can't say, well, socialism's about leaving it down to the market, for the market to freely regulate itself, for the market to regulate what prices are through the laws of supply and demand. Yeah, that's socialism. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it isn't. That's capitalism. See, that's what I mean. Market socialists are oxymoronic. They're like Vosh, right? The only argument they can come up with is abuse. They don't understand the very simple fact that when you're speaking about the market versus central planning, especially when you're speaking about prices, you're speaking about A, market referring to the laws of supply and demand. So for example, your retail companies, you see the prices fluctuate in the laws of supply and demand because it's left down to the market. That's what it means by the market, right? When you're speaking about, central planning, in other words, you're speaking about controlling the prices, right? Centrally planning it. In other words, the central planner is the government. The government was the one that basically plans what the prices are. So that's what it boils down to. An argument between, do you control the prices or do you leave it down to the market to freely regulate what prices are itself? And we all know what a freely regulated market economy is. It's a free market economy. It's capitalism. These people haven't even got a clue. They've not even got a Scooby about what socialism is. They've literally taken the entire meaning of socialism and absolutely ripped the arse out of it. And they've basically taken something that's capitalism and now they're trying to relabel it as something socialist. They're so confused. You see what I mean? And this is what you're up against. But that's a concession, folk. That's a massive, massive concession. That's him basically saying, that the market's more efficient for allocating resources. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because it isn't socialism. So, let's just continue on what he says.
Well, the thing is that we have to note for central planning, especially, there's God knows how many systems of central planning. You have what Lenin did. You have a
what? What on earth is he talking about? Central planning is central planning. There is only one central planning. There isn't a variety of different kinds of central planning. Central planning just means to centrally plan. It just means, like, if you're centrally planning prices, you're controlling prices through a central body for the whole economy. Such as, for example, if you're going to centrally plan healthcare, then you're centrally planning the healthcare system. And that's another thing, because, like I've said before, folk, a big part of what defines socialism is political centralisation. So in other words, centralising, take, for example, the words socialised medicine. What do you think it means by the name socialism? It means centralism. All these variety of different kinds. It's just... there is only one central planning.
Stalin did, you have what Mao did, you have what Hoxha did. There's like...
They were all the same. they all had the same results.
God knows how many varieties of central planning that may have some slight differentiations here and there, but either way, they're different forms.
No, they aren't. They aren't different forms. It's just a question of whether, it's a question of scale, right? So it's like comparing Stalin to Mao, and depending on what they do. But central planning is central planning. It just depends what you centrally plan. Now, we understand that the Soviet Union, to a varying extent, used the market, like I says. But where you could see their central planning was the control over prices. like Vladimir Popov and, that of Nikolai Shmelev had pointed out.
Markets in themselves are simple enough. The only thing that really differentiates different types of market systems is how much the market is regulated.
Mm-hmm.
The markets are simple enough. The whole reason for why the Soviet Union took on the market was because they failed miserably in their original attempt under Vladimir Lenin to try and achieve their utopian nonsense. That's the reason why they resorted to the market. It was basically a concession that they simply could not achieve the impossible. That's what it was. That's why the Soviet Union, to a varying extent, took on the market. That's essentially it. And it's just humorous because he thinks it's so simple, right? Again, 65 million people in Great Britain. Each and every single individual all having different needs and wants. Let's just take, for example, and this isn't the case in socialism, by the way, because it's not a market, right? So it wouldn't be like this. It wouldn't be like where you've got private companies and you've got all the different clothing stores, right? That just isn't the case. So, for example, under capitalism, you would have, companies like Gap or Shoe, or all these variety of different shoe shops and clothes shops, and all the competition out there in the market. Next, River Island, you name it, right? All these companies, Nike, Castor, you name it. Okay, when it comes down to that of central planning of clothing, the central planner's going to have to work out how much to produce of each and every single item, right? It would have to have the knowledge of every single possible option available. Now the issue is, not all clothing is the same. You've got all the variety of different materials, because that's just reality. It's just like how shirts are made of different material. They're not all the same. You've got the cheaper material, and then you've got the more expensive material, etc. And then on top of all of that, you've got the different styles, the different colours. Not everybody likes the same colours, not everybody likes the same styles. So how then do you know, out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different options of each and every single item you could possibly imagine, how then do you know how much to produce of each and every single one of them? You don't. There's no possible way you could know that information. And then you could draw to the question, well, what if you ran surveys? Well, it's just like I pointed out for the example that Kevin D. Williamson explained. It's impossible, because people don't give honest answers when it comes to, surveys. And people's minds also constantly change. Just because you want something new doesn't mean to say you want it a week from now. In fact, you could change your mind tomorrow. And again, it's the same thing where your mind changes, all the time. And like Ludwig von Mises pointed out, and the biggest flaw of Karl Marx's labour theory of value is the fact that he thought, value could just be something, fixed. But Ludwig von Mises said, who's it valuable to? At what time is it valuable? So in other words, is summer clothing gonna be the same value during the winter period? No, of course no. And then to complicate things even further, how about you compare Florida to New York, where Florida's hot all year round and New York isn't? So there's an issue. Demand isn't going to be the same in Florida to that of demand of what you see in New York. You see, these complexities, these folk don't understand. They just think it's just something simple. It really is humorous. It's so sad. They don't even understand even the very basics. Again, let's continue on what it says.
So it's a bit of a misnomer to say whether it's market or central planning, because central planning within itself is a bit of a vague term. You have to figure out what the systems are specifically, which, as I've mentioned before, there's the systems that come into place. But even then, I have my criticisms I've mentioned before of both markets and central planning. Markets within themselves just kind of like overestimate the prices of goods that have greater social benefit rather than raising the prices of goods that have a more negative social benefit. And central planning within itself is like pretty much authoritarian, does like random self-management evaluation and whatnot. But I think, generally speaking, if we're like to say,
I mean, I assume like the best possible, or like a good version of markets that both of you and I would agree with should be a pretty like heavily regulated market, and your given preferable alternative of a command economy, which I think you said was participatory economics. These two systems.
It's not a command economy. I just like to mention it's not command economy. It's a decentrally planned economy.
Okay.
Oh my god! Yeah, I'm just going through this. Folk, I've never heard it. I have never heard a bigger oxymoron than that. Right? If you don't know why I've I've heard of oxymorons like libertarian socialism, or it's like someone calling himself a libertarian communist, right? This one's hilarious. A decentralized planned economy. What do you think it means when you're planning the economy? That is central planning, right? That's what it is. There's no such thing as this, decentralized planned economy, right? Because what it means to plan the economy, it means to control and plan out and basically, centralize it. That's essentially what you're doing, right? It's an oxymoron of what he's just argued. You can't have a centralized, decentralized economy, right? Unless you're speaking about certain parts of the economy that's decentralized and other parts of the economy that are more centralized, and maybe in a mixed economy or whatever. But even to a varying extent, it is still, littered with, mixed economies, collectivism. But he's arguing for a decentralized economy, but a planned economy at the same time. That's arse end backwards. These people are just so... Oh my god, folk. You can't even sum up how stupid that is. And I'm sorry to say that, and I don't mean that in any derogatory manner. I mean it because it's a stupid idea. Because to decentralise means to move away from, central planning. It means to basically decentralise the economy. It means to move towards private ownership. That's what you're doing. That's essentially what you're doing when you're decentralising. You're pulling away from that of nationalisation, which is centralism. That's what centralisation is. What do you think it means by nationalisation? National. When something is nationalised, it's centralised. That is socialism. Right? So, and this is that, because the name socialism is in relation to socialised property. Socialised property is centralised property. That's why the word collectivism is synonymous to the word, collectivism is synonymous to the word socialism. It's so humorous because these folk haven't got a clue what they're talking about. Don't know if I've missed any other, quite a few comments. Yep. So I think I've covered that. So yeah, I mean, it's ludicrous. It's a very, very silly argument. There is no such thing as a decentralized planned economy. To plan the economy is to centralize. That's what it means.
So it's still planned economy, but command economy is top down, and planned economy could be top down or bottom up.
Right.
All right, perfect. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Right, planned economy, your ideal version of like a planned economy versus like an idealized version of a market economy.
No, what you've done is you've just basically bastardized the entire meaning of a planned economy. A planned economy means that you're going to have a central planner, because you need that. How else are you going to plan for 65 million people to keep them all on the same page in order to achieve your so-called egalitarian utopia of equality? Of all your lovely equality. Everything's all about equality. We need to achieve our equality. So how are you going to achieve your equality on 65 million people? You're going to need a central planner, aren't you?
Ceteris paribus, assuming all else is the same, why do you think that the planned economy would perform better, and why do you think that the economic calculation problem is invalid?
I think, mainly speaking, as I've mentioned before, the economic calculation problem just kind of like relies too much on markets. It relies on the fact that like markets are good, planning bad. That's it.
No. You see, we don't just sit there and make such baseless claims, right? We don't just sit there and make such baseless claims. The bottom line is, and this is what it really all boils down to, we explain why central planning cannot work. We give you the reason. We even give you historical examples. It's not like we just say, oh well, a planned economy doesn't work and that's it. I mean, that's what that argument sounds like. It sounds like as if you're trying to say that your critiques are just saying, oh well, it just doesn't work and that's it. No, we don't just say it doesn't work and that's it. We say that because of your public ownership of property, because and it's inevitable with nationalisation, because here's the issue. Number one, your socialism seeks to get rid of the private sector. So you're going to be running the printing press. When you run the printing press, you're going to be faced with serious inflationary problems. This then follows that when you're faced with the serious inflationary problems, you're going to try and control the prices by setting down price ceilings. And it happens over and 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 over. It's happened so many times that it's laughable. And you socialists, every single time that you've led into this disaster, you don't seem to accept it. That's the issue, folk. That's what the real issue is, folk. Let me try and thingy this microphone a bit, because it's a bit loudish. You guys can still hear me okay? I try to avoid the red, so to speak. But folk, it's been tried and tested over and over, about 1 billion times, okay? And that's what happens. When you're running the printing press, inflation follows. The high inflation then results in them trying to combat the inflationary problems. So how do they try to combat the inflationary problems? They try to control the prices. And nationalisation entails government price controls. In other words, public ownership of property. Take, for example, the NHS with the so-called free at the point of use. They took away the information of profits and losses. They took away prices being left be to freely regulate through the laws of supply and demand. As a result of that very issue, you are then faced with that serious problem. That's essentially what happened, folk. And as a result of all of that, you were then faced with the economic calculation problem. It's unavoidable. And the reason for why you're faced with the economic calculation problem is because socialists don't understand what prices are. That's it. Socialists don't understand prices. They don't get it. Prices are not obstacles to getting things that you want. Prices are signals. They are the most important pieces of information to the operation of an entire economy. Profits is information you gather from consumer demand. That is information telling you consumers' needs and wants. That's what profits are. In other words, profits isn't just something of a surplus that you fill your own pockets with. Profits is information telling you what consumers are spending most on. Profits is the information telling you, here's what consumers are spending most on, therefore we know what to produce more of. It's also sending information to the producer. Since we know this is what consumers want more of, we know what resources to use more of, and we know where we're going to allocate those scarce natural resources, where to best allocate it in a market that is vast, filled with trillions and trillions of different products out there in the market. That's what profits are. Profits are signals. Profits is information saying, here is where in the market there is greater demand for this specific product for whatever reason being. And as you know, demand changes throughout the year. Just because it's in high demand now doesn't mean to say it's going to be in high demand 2 months from now. You know, demand could simply change. And that's the complexity of humanity. Socialists don't understand all that complexity. They just think it's something simple. They just think we're robots that zip up the back and have a wee button in the back you use to press. That's essentially what they see us as. They don't understand profits and losses. And it's like I said before about the incentives that profits and losses give. I mean, you take, for example, private companies. You know, in competition, see if private businesses are making losses, it incentivises them to make changes. And losses is basically the information to say, here's what consumers are not spending on. Here's what consumers don't care about. Here's what consumers are, moving away from. Here's what consumers don't want. Therefore, we know not to use those resources. We know not to allocate these resources into that part of the market. That's what profits and losses tell the market. So if you essentially take away the information of profits and losses, you're taking away all of that information. In simple English language, you would not hold the information of profits and losses. That is to say, you would not hold the information of what to produce more of and stop producing, what resources to use and stop using, how much to produce, where to allocate the valuable scarce resources and where to stop allocating, what to invest more in and stop investing in, and of course, how the resources are transported. You wouldn't hold any of that information. That's the very reason why, when it comes to central planning for 65 million people, the central planner, as soon as they destroy that information of profits and losses, they're left with nothing other than guesswork. That's the very reason why the NHS in Britain was eventually, to a varying extent, not entirely, but to a varying extent, decentralised to some extent, so that they brought in this market, quasi-socialist, somewhat model. So it's somewhat market today. I'm sure it's in England, namely, I'm not entirely sure how it runs today. There's still inefficiency, unfortunately, because of the price controls, the free at the point of use. That's still problematic. But on a question of scale, there was some level of it through the PFI deals, etc., etc. Of course, there's still problems, but that's the reason why they did that. Because the NHS was an abysmal failure even long before that. You know, and they don't want to ever accept that. It's evidence of its failure. Is there any comments I've missed out? Let me just check. As you say, hey Scotty, what would you say to someone who believes in decentralization of Soviets? Well, this is the issue, because people don't understand socialism. You have to look at the name. Look up the definition of socialized medicine, or what it means by socialized property, right? I know it can be quite difficult to find at times because of the fact you've got another word obviously for socialised as to socialise is to communicate, right? But when you look up and you look, you know, in depth through a variety of different sources, you will find what it means. If you do extensive research, you'll find what socialised means, to socialise. In other words, let's just take, for example, private ownership of agriculture, where you've got individual ownership of agriculture, of farmland. So what's the opposite of that? Socialism. The opposite of that is basically to have communal ownership of agriculture. What's communal ownership? What does it mean by collective ownership? Well, that is centralised. That's what it means by, you know, centralised. You've collectivised it. That's what it means. That's what it means by the word collect. What are you doing when you collect something? You're bringing it together, aren't you? You're collectivising it. You're centralising it. That's what it means. This is why these people are so embarrassing, because they don't even understand the English language, for crying out loud. They're trying to argue with the English language. They're basically trying to say that socialism can be something other than what it actually is. And it's got nothing at all to do with, you know, decentralisation. So that's essentially what you're speaking about. When you're speaking about to socialise property, you're speaking about to centralise it, to collectivise it, in other words. That's why the word collectivism is synonymous to the word socialism. So when they're speaking about Soviets, they're essentially speaking about that today with, you know, centralism. So yeah, I mean, I hope that covers that for you. As you say, not sure if you've covered this before, but what's the best way we can combat school indoctrination and teach people importance of free markets? Well, this is it. You need to take it out the horns of government, Errol, and that's the bottom line of it. You need to remove education from government completely. I have heard a recent issue, however, of China and what it's been doing, but state education was founded solely on the basis of political indoctrination. That was the purpose of it. It was, you know, the excuse that was used was, you know, later down the line they says, oh well, we brought in state education to provide education for everyone. That's not the truth. That's not the history of state education. State education was brought in, and you can read the history of it. It was brought in and it was influenced from the Prussian school model. And it was basically brought in as a tool to politically indoctrinate, because if you can, you know, have one entity, which is the government, have a monopoly over education, The state's the one that holds the monopoly over the information it provides. And what's it going to do? It provides information that suits its narrative so that when you leave school, you become subservient to the state. That's the very reason why you cannot allow government to touch your education system. And you can see that today in Scotland. You can blatantly see it. I mean, even after things like the Named Persons Act, even after things like the hate crime bill, they're still voting SNP in masses. I mean, what more does it take for these people to waken up and realise that they're basically voting for a bunch of authoritarians who are out and out political fascists? It's not a case that I say that as as someone misinformed about it. I understand fascism. I understand the economic element of fascism, which is corporatism. They literally are acting as the fascists. And what led to that very problem of what you're seeing in this country today is unfortunately the political indoctrination that's taking place in this country. That's the very reason why countless many hated Thatcher. Because they don't understand economic history. They don't understand economics. They think individualism's the cause of their problems. And I actually had a comment in a recent video, and it was in the one with Lauren Southern, and someone was saying that individualism's the cause of our problems today. This was coming from someone who claims to be a conservative. Claiming to be a conservative? Somebody who claims to be against socialism, claims to be a conservative, and says that individualism's the cause of the problems that they have today. And that this is what you've got. You've got a very, very serious problem. Now, I was absent at the time in 2016. I wasn't around when, of course, the likes of Lauren Southern, was posting all that stuff and moved away from libertarianism, and I went through a bad spell, obviously in my life at that time, but when I was absent, the likes of Richard Spencer propped up, and then you seen all the alt-right and etc, and they're heavily criticising individualism. You're thinking to yourself, you don't even understand what you're even going on about. And then it wasn't just these nationalist socialists. This was coming from folk who claim to support capitalism, but were supporting, conservatism, and I'm thinking to myself, you're completely lost. You don't understand what you're going on about. Individualism's not the cause of why we're in this mess today. And that's unfortunately, that's the issue. You need that there. You need to remove the government for education. You cannot allow it to have the power to control the information, because once it holds a monopoly over the information that it feeds, it's the same when it comes to exams. Your answers have to match what the government wants. And that's why you can't allow that. But don't get me wrong, it's a complicated issue, because you can't. You need freedom of press first and foremost. You need to have, the freedom to be able to, have these lecturers, these what you see today isn't capitalism, of course, but what you need is a free market education system, and something there that allows to teach people about the free market. And that's the only way that we're ever going to change things, is through educating folk. It's a very, very sad thing, the way the education system's gone today. That's for sure. And you can definitely see that. unfortunate as it is to say. Should have put in, like I says earlier on about the workers' co-ops. I could obviously do something separate on that, you know. The more candidates there are to be the Soviet administrator, the more the vote will be diluted, and you can end up as a Soviet representative community with only 5 to 10% of the vote. As you say, Marcus, I don't know if I'd say there's school indoctrination. I can only speak from my personal experience, but at my high school we covered the aggression and follies of the USSR. Yeah, you will get that to a certain extent. I'm glad to see that though. I am glad to see that to a varying extent. I would imagine if you're in England, you know, that might be the case. I'm not sure if there's anything like that here in Scotland though. You know, it's just ridiculous, so to speak. You know, there's a very, very good reason for why you're seeing so many of these Marxists today, especially these universities and stuff. There is a serious problem. It's a very difficult thing to try and tackle. There's no easy answer, that's for sure. Errol, this is why I think it should be more of a priority to privatise education than privatising NHS or anything else. Yeah, I mean, well, it's a big priority in both fronts, that's for sure. You know, it's more implicit and subtle. Yeah. Education isn't a right. Change my mind. You're right. I completely agree with you there, Matt. You're absolutely right with that, pal. I mean, it's nobody has a right to. People don't understand what rights are, and again, I could do a separate argument in that. So yeah. Let's just. I'll go on. I'll get around to comments because, like I say, I mean, there's enough of this video. Let's just listen to this.
And when it comes to why I prefer like a planned economy over a market, for me, it's that markets within themselves have an inherent bias, as I've mentioned earlier, against products that have a good social benefit.
Against merit products.
Right. So like if you have like oil or gas, those will be priced lower than some kind of ethical version of muffins or something that kind of general idea. Right?
Price lower than muffins, did you say, or something? Again, it's this thing where they don't understand prices, folk. They don't understand. I mean, it's not necessarily the case. It's just like how you see in the United States today, where there's a shortage problem. Prices are signals, and it's like I said, folk, higher price in the market is a price signal to say there's a shortage. The lower price in the market is to say there's an abundance. He doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand why in the market you might end up with a higher price or something. And it's also done to the consumer's vote. So, for example, it's the consumer who votes with a dollar or the pound of what price is going to be. After all, if you've got a very, very high demand for something, then price is obviously going to drive up, right? So that's people voting with their dollar or voting with the pound. And it's also down to a question of what's the consumer willing to pay for something. So it's just like that argument with the $2,000 gold pizza. Now you might think that's abhorrent, but hold on a wee second here. What's stopping you going elsewhere and getting a $6 pizza or a $2 pizza or whatever, however much it costs? What's stopping you if you're doing so? There's nothing stopping you if you're doing so. Just because that one company is selling $2,000 gold pizzas Doesn't mean anything. If they've got a $2,000 gold pizza still out there, and they're still selling $2,000 gold pizzas, what that information is telling you is there's obviously a market there. There's obviously people, whether you agree with it or no, there's obviously people spending. Now, that's the economic reality. The price is going to be determined down to what consumers are willing to pay for something. You might not agree with it, but that's just economic reality. It's the same with Apple's prices. Apple is very, very expensive. We get that. You look at their laptops, you look at their computers, just look at their new gear now. Right? Very, very expensive gear. Whether you agree with it or no, there's people that are willing to pay for it. Right? And so long as there's people willing to pay for it, then they can get away with that price. As soon as consumer demand falls, however, and people are not willing to pay a certain amount, then of course that forces the company to reduce their prices. So I don't know where he's gone with this whole idea. Plus the fact price is going to be affected by other issues. Just like again what you see in the United States of America, the closure of the pipelines resulted in a shortage problem. It's just like what happens if an earthquake takes place. A disaster takes place, and it ends up creating a shortage or something. Then the price of those goods drive up. It's just like I says, take for example wood, oak wood. Let's just say for whatever reason being a disaster comes along, and it goes into a shortage. Right, oak wood. It means that all the oak wooden products, such as your desks, chairs, tables that are out there in the market currently, the price of those oak wooden products drives up in price because it's in shortage. That's an argument to say that the market is efficient. That's the market saying, to consumers, maybe you should look elsewhere and buy an alternative until that resource replenishes. That's what it does. You see, for example, it will basically, if the price soars, right, it incentivizes consumers to spend elsewhere. You're not going to overspend in something. They don't understand consumer behavioural pattern. That's the issue, folk. They don't understand consumer behavioural pattern. They think it's just simplistic. They don't get the very issue that when price goes up, demand falls. When price goes down, demand goes up. So here's the issue. Here's a prime example. The housing shortage crisis. There was no housing shortage in the United States of America, even although the quantity of housing increased by 10% and so did the population increase by 10%. No shortage problem. It wasn't until the government stepped in with a rent control law, imposed the rent controls, and what happened in places like San Francisco and New York? Well, the housing shortage problem immediately followed, a price shortage problem. Why? Because see all the people who were otherwise living with their parents and all the people who were otherwise living with their flatmates, they saw that the price fell, so their demand drove up, and before you know it, all those, flats, etc., even 3-bedroom, places, were overoccupied by singular persons. Once it was all over-occupied, I think it was about 48% in, San Francisco and about 46% in New York or something like that. I think Thomas Sowell had mentioned. But once all of that was over-occupied, who did that leave a shortage for? Families. People who were, just starting up their own family and, are looking for, 3 bedrooms and stuff like that for their kids, for the sake of themselves and stuff like that. There became a shortage. Why did it become a shortage? Because as soon as the price is artificially driven down, consumer demand drives up. And what socialists also don't understand is they don't understand human nature. So people tend to buy more than what they need. They tend to do that at a lower price. They take advantage of it. So what you actually found was other people were buying second homes. And whether socialists, agree with that or not, doesn't matter what socialists think of that. They could think, oh, that's just greed. That's just greed. That's just greed. We need to stop that. Tough. That's human nature. That's what happens when you artificially lower the price. You can't argue with that. That's human nature. And that's why socialists are control freaks. Because see, as soon as because number one, they don't want to accept that economic reality of scarcity. And you can see that scarcity problem with that example there. And number two, they don't want to accept the reality. They don't want to accept the reality of human nature. They don't like human nature. They think human nature is just greed, right? That's how they view human nature. So what do you think socialists are going to do when they see people trying to take more than what they need? Socialists try to control it. That's another reason for why it leads down the road of dictatorship and authoritarianism. Because they try to control everybody. They try to control how much you can have. They try to control, the quantity of each person. And how are you going to do that without central planning? You can't. That's the very reason why in Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, the Chaz, it's the very reason why within the space of 2 weeks you were quickly seeing their own form of government. And funny enough, they renamed it CHOP, and they were going to bring in their own prisons. These people are a comedy show. They really are a comedy show, folk, because they just don't understand economics and human nature. They don't understand when you artificially reduce a price, which is what they're going to try and do. They don't understand human nature, that certain folk will just try and buy up more than other folk, and that's just it. That's why you need prices. Prices are there to ration things, right? It rations scarcity and in an efficient manner. That was the very reason why Thomas Sowell, and I don't know if I can actually, because it's around there somewhere. I don't know if I could find it for you folk. Unfortunately, it would take me a bit to find. Thomas Sowell touches upon an example in a quote, and he mentions about that today with the fact that it was the same problem with the NHS in Britain. And I've read it to you before, you probably know. It's the one today with the fact that there was a 12-year-old lassie that was, basically given... A 12-year-old lassie was given a boob job. And she was first in line ahead of countless cancer patients that were left in a 15-month waiting list. And basically, this cancer patient, this woman, had been, I wouldn't say the word pestering. She's trying to think of a better word. Because she's obviously rightly calling out for help to get an operation done, and rightly so. And she was knocked back countless times. And unfortunately, by the time they got rid of her, the cancer became too malignant, right? That's exactly what I'm speaking about. And all of that was because of the fact that price was removed. Because you basically removed the rationing of prices. the purpose of what that rationing does. Just like if price soars out of control of something, that is rationing. That's saying, well, if you really, really need it, it's going to be for the type of people who can afford, but it's also going to disincentivize consumers and make them spend elsewhere, so that, you know, just like the wood can replenish. Just, you know, those small examples. Again, let's just go on to the example of what you're speaking about.
Right. And
Do you think that's by virtue of them being merit or demerit goods, though, or do you think that has to do with like other aspects related to the product? So if we talk about, for example, like coal and oil, do you think that the prices are so low because they're bad for the environment, or because they're cheap
it's not
products to
that.
use?
It's not because they're bad for the. It's not. The price is not inherent
Apex on Anarchy
to
just
the
wanted to
thing
say,
itself.
keep up the
It's
good
just
work.
that I guess more accurately, markets misestimate the social costs of products.
Oh yeah, 100%. It just doesn't adjust for externalities. 100%.
Right.
A unregulated economy just doesn't do that. Yeah, 100%. But
That's just nonsense. That really is nonsense. If you don't know what a negative externality... Let me give you an example of a negative externality, folk, right? Just to... And I'll just quickly explain this, and then we'll go on to, obviously, the rest of what he's saying, right? An example of a negative externality is, for example, let's just say a private landowner, for whatever reason being, decides to take waste and then dumps it into a river. And then let's say his neighbour further downstream, you know, needs the river for the sake of his business. And this is another private landowner, right? And let's say that that's toxic waste and it's carried down into his property and affected the river. Now, he doesn't understand property rights, right? Neither does that Pinkerton, that he's an economist, right? He doesn't understand it either, because he didn't mention anything about individual property rights. Because the truth of the matter is, number one, your land can either appreciate or depreciate in value, right? So you've got an incentive, and it's no different today with that of you know your private business and whatnot. You've got reputation to look after. It's not something you can just damage, right? You pay a heavy price for damaging your reputation, and you don't profit for it. You make losses for it, right? But just like land can appreciate or depreciate in value. How do you appreciate the value of your property? Looking after your resources. The other way to look at that is the very fact that it costs you more to use more resources. So they're not going to use more resources, and even if they were to take, for example, cut down trees, they're going to regrow the trees because it appreciates the value of their property, right? So why the hell would somebody who owns private property dump waste into a river that's going to depreciate the value of their land? They're not going to do that from a personal point of view, because what's the gain for it? What is there to gain for depreciating the value of your property that you're personally going to make a loss for? You're not going to benefit. Not unless government's going to step in with government subsidies, and I says I'd get around to doing, you know, an explanation on that. So government subsidies is going to create an issue, because then they're guaranteed, if you understand what I'm saying, government subsidies guarantees them funding. But if you take away government, let's just say government's out the way, and there's no government subsidies whatsoever, and you've got nobody to subsidise you, and you depreciate the value of your land, you're paying for it. You're paying the heavy cost for that. And are you going to benefit for that? No. Because if you want to sell your private property on at a profit, you're going to have to appreciate the value of your property, ain't you? You're not going to appreciate the value of your property by dumping waste into a river. And even then, it goes down to the argument on the property rights. Because see if that carries down into somebody else's private property, right? See if the toxic waste goes down into somebody's private property and into that river and it affects that person's business. That person can take that person to court. Because after all, it's damaging their property. They can take them to court. That's the fact that these people don't acknowledge. They don't understand property rights, and they don't understand just individuals' rights. And it's just like that example with businesses. He just thinks it's a case that you can just violate other individuals' rights and just get away with it, and as if they can just do what they want. It's a bit like that silly argument someone used about dangerous products. See if a company was putting out dangerous products and harmed anybody in any sort of, way in terms of business, they're going to damage their reputation as a business, right? They really will. And that will come at a heavy cost on them. So, this is exactly what I mean about the government subsidies. Forget the fact that they're inefficient, right? The government subsidies encourages that sort of behaviour. See if you remove all those government subsidies, etc., and force those companies to sink or swim, that's when it really changes. Now, I'm not saying that anything's perfect in this world. You'll ever have anything perfect, right? Because I'm not painting that sort of world, and you'll always have some level of corruption and exploitation, etc., etc. But see if you force them into a position of sinking and swimming, which basically means that they're going to have to serve their customers and look after their reputation in order to make a profit, in order to run business, then it breeds that efficiency. That's the very reason why political entrepreneurs did not like the free market. They didn't like it because they knew they could not compete. They knew that they weren't good enough. Those who were benefiting the consumer the most were the likes of your John D. Rockefeller. The very ones that the socialists tried to claim held some sort of monopoly over the market, and they didn't. You should look up and research about John Davison Rockefeller. I'm not saying he's perfect, but that guy was arguably one of the most intelligent businessmen that ever existed, and that's the reason why he got to the position that he was in. But even for a man like him, he still had competition up against him. You understand where I'm coming from on the whole thing today with the negative externalities. It's all rhetorical nonsense, folk. It's just it's all made up pish. It doesn't acknowledge business reputation. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that when it comes to private property owners, they're faced with the economic reality that their property can either appreciate in value or depreciate in value. You've got no incentive to depreciate the value of your property. No incentive whatsoever. They can even be forced into a concession on this. And you could say to them, well, you do say that the goal of a private business or landowner is to make a profit. Well, that's their concession then, isn't it? If that's their goal, then their goal is going to be to appreciate the value of their property. It's not going to be, to cut down trees and then just, do nothing and no regrow them. These people, they just make you laugh. They really do make you laugh. Let's move on with his argument.
But if I lay out I'm going to lay out a version of the economic calculation program and like an argument in favor of it.
Oh, goody.
So if you think about it this way, okay, given that you have two economies, you have two populations, and what we know about populations, we know that there are demands that need to be met for the given population. We know that the demand is not just constant throughout any really given period of time. There are a massive amount of things that shift demand. Things like everything from like long-term needs, like let's say an economy is transitioning towards using more like electric cars or whatever, to everything from short-term things to like trends within clothing, encouraging people to buy certain types of clothing because they're trendy or whatever. The demand for products shifts greatly throughout, any given time basis, really.
Right, that's important because that is acknowledging why socialism is deeply flawed. It really is, and he doesn't understand that, of course. But that's acknowledging the fact why central planning cannot work. But what he doesn't touch upon is that it's not just a case of a population. We're not a society. We're not a group. We're individuals. We've all got different needs and wants. You look at society as a whole, we're so complex. But you're right in mentioning the very fact that demand changes over time, and it will constantly do so. You take, for example, I've probably not got it sitting, nearby. Even just, as an example with, my lenses and that, right? When I first got my Canon 5D Mark III, it was about 1,300 quid, right? 1,300 quid. That's the Canon EF 1.2 lens, the 85mm 1.2 Mark II. A very, very expensive. Again, that was about 1,300 quid, right? See if you. The problem is with lenses, though, it's not the best example because lenses do tend to hoard their value, right? They do tend to haunt their value, and I was thinking of doing a video on the economics of photography at some point, but it's not the best example. The better example would be to use a camera body, right? The 5D Mark III, because it's not in the market anymore, right? Value changes with time, but it also changes in relation to whatever given products are out there in the market at the time. So for example, when the 5D Mark IV was coming out, and when the 5D Mark IV hit the shelves, demand changed. So what do you think is going to happen to the price of the 5D Mark III? It dropped to about 500 odd quid or something. Yeah, well, gradually. And now Wex doesn't even, sell them anymore. You have to go on, sites like that of, what do you call it? MPB photographic and stuff like that, where they sell these second hand cameras and stuff like that, right? So that's what I mean. Value changes with time, but it also changes in retrospect with whatever is out there at the time, because technology obviously changes, things all change. It's just like how you see what I would love to have, like the DJI Mavic, the drones and stuff like that. Even they change because the newer ones come out. That's what happens, right? He's right for pointing, these things out, but that's the issue, right? Because you then require fluctuating prices. If you're going to take away the information of prices, of profits and losses, you're going to end up with a serious problem. The better example was Thomas Sowell's example in his book Basic Economics, where he explains about the ingredients that they go into the likes of cheese, yogurt, etc., etc. Ice cream and whatever, right? Using milk, of course. And he speaks about the relationship. The purpose of prices is to tell you what's in greater demand over what, right? But you're going to need to leave those prices down to the market. That's capitalism. That isn't socialism. Socialism is central planning, and that's what that boy doesn't understand. This boy just doesn't, get socialism. He's basically speaking about something almost, pretty much speaking about capitalism to a varying extent, right? Ludwig von Mises' argument in that sense, right? But Ludwig von Mises was critiquing socialism in general because of his central planning. That's what Mises was arguing. But this boy doesn't understand this. He's completely redefined socialism.
And under a market economy, it's really volatile, right? So let's say there is a rise. A lot of people just, really, there seems to be an indication of demand through price signals. People are willing to pay more for, let's say, ripped jeans, for example. What the market can do then is because they recognize that, hey, there are so many people buying ripped jeans that people are willing to buy them at higher products. We can go create more products here and meet that excess demand and produce products for them so that we reach another market equilibrium.
But that's the issue, because the only way that they know that, and because you've got to remember, right? You've got to remember there's not just one type of ripped jeans, and then you've got the complexity of an entire country, right? So you need to know where there is greater demand. It's just like that example again that Thomas Sowell used with the central body office for providing oil to these petrol stations. But across each and every state, each and every single city that you could possibly think of, where there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these petrol stations across the entire country, right? And this one petrol company obviously has its main office building in Texas, right? And for providing petrol, it's no, simple. You've got the economic reality that you've got diesel. You've got the, expensive type of petrol that would be used for sports motors. And then you've got the, cheaper sort of petrol that would be used for your average motorist, right? Now, the reason prices are so important is because then you know where the greater demand is. So every single month, traffic is going to change. That's just economic reality. For whatever reason being, and you can't predict it, for whatever reason being, something might prop up and you might see a higher demand where, these big lorries and stuff like that are passing through and just happen to go to this specific petrol station. So demand is going to soar. But the only reason why you know that, the only reason why the central body, the office in Texas, the only reason they know that demand is gone up and where they need to allocate more diesel is simply because the demand had driven up in that area, in that one petrol station. Because you've got to remember, they have to work out how much of diesel they're going to send out and to what petrol stations. You think about it, there's hundreds of them across the entire United States of America. So if there's hundreds of them across the United States of America, they're going to need the information of prices, aren't they? They're going to need to know, what petrol stations are in greater demand. What tells you that information that there's greater demand? Prices. Because when the demand goes up, the price goes up. That's how they know. There's prices that tell them that information. He just thinks it's just a case of, yeah, it's just ripped jeans and that's it. This is what I mean, folk. They've honestly got such a simplistic worldview of just the economy. They don't get it.
And that we allocate our resources most efficiently. Now, should that happen under a planned economy, there isn't a price signal. You don't notice how people are willing to pay more for this product, or there are a bunch of more, at least per my understanding of planned economies right now. Hold
on a wee second here. This boy agrees with him in critiquing the economic calculation problem. But now he's saying, in a complete contradiction, that they don't have price signals. why socialists are... They are that arse-end backwards that they just do mental gymnastics that you think to yourself, how the hell did you even achieve that? You're probably sitting there as baffled as what I'm are. I can't even make heads or tails out of that. That's a contradiction of what he was stating earlier. Let's just move on what he says. Jesus.
There isn't a bunch of people buying this product, there isn't people buying it at a higher price than usual, and as such, because there's a lack of the price signal, you aren't really able to send the same types of messages to producers telling them what to produce and how much to produce.
But that's capitalism. That's what it means to leave it down to the market. For the market to determine what prices are. That's capitalism, that isn't socialism. Jesus Christ, man. Oh shit. Oh dear. Oh, it's just... Oh my god, man. I thought he says he debunked or whatever he says, something about he agrees that the economic calculation problem's irrational. It's just, oh my god, folk. I'm fucking lost for words.
And in that environment, it seems to me that markets are more efficient at doing that, at producing resources that meets the needs of the population than what planned economies are, just because markets are more volatile and are more versatile.
Yeah, I think if we were to like consider like planned economies as like more centrally planned, like if we're talking about stereotypical centrally command economy, whatever, then a case could be made for that. But
they just don't get it, folk. They don't realise that. They're basically saying socialism doesn't work. Let's just move on. Jesus.
I think, like, for example, what participatory economic does, if you don't mind me sliding this in, is that first it lets people, basically it's like a glorified grocery list. You have people write out everything that they may need for next year. They don't have to be too specific. They don't have to be too generic. Just enough to where we understand what everyone is saying. Then once we have this, you have like workplaces giving like, hey, I'm going to make this, and I'm going to make this much of that, and then I need this much in order to make that. And then just to skip over everything, I'll explain it in further detail at some point. But you aggregate all of this, you like figure out, like, along with social costs and benefits of everything, you figure out indicators that seem similar to prices, but it's a bit wish-washy here and there. And then you make like 5 like whatever final plans, and we all vote for it. And then once you get done with that, you let people actually get the stuff. But we also have to allow for
Let me just say something here with this collective voting, right? Because this is essentially what he's trying to say, right? And I've seen this argument before, folk, right? You want to know what the problem is with these communal ownership and these communes and stuff like that, and even the idea of these, I think they're trying to argue with the individual communes and all the rest of this, right? Here's the issue, right? When you plan production, because he was arguing earlier on for a decentralised planned economy, which is backwards, right? when you are in a position where you're collectively, let's just say this commune, right, where they're collectively voting, right, just like a democracy. A democracy, you collectively vote, and then there's the losing population, right? But you're basing it on a collective vote, right? Do you know what that is saying? It's saying that your individual needs and wants are sacrificed, and you are sacrificing your individual needs and wants for the sake of a group. That's what it's saying. Because after all, in order to, meet the needs and wants of the collective, of the commune, of the collective, for there to be collective, vote on what gets produced, you have to give up your own needs and wants for the sake of the group. And you often find that within group situations. Have you ever, you probably have, you've probably, found yourself, working in a company, or even when you were at school, and you found yourself doing certain projects that were group projects, and it came to collective decision making, and you would chip in with your ideas, but at the same time, because you're working in the group, there was issues where what you want had to be sacrificed for the sake of the greater number. That's essentially it. And that's the problem. That's what happens when you take away individual liberty and individual rights, and you take away individualism, basically. Because there's nothing rational about it. Because you're having to take away and sacrifice your needs and wants for the sake of other people. Why is that preferable over individuals just being freely able to simply shop around for what they want? You see what I'm saying? That's the issue with that argument. It's an irrational argument, and even from a moral standpoint of view, there's nothing moral about it. You can't call that moral. How's it moral to take away an individual's rights and liberty? How's it moral to sacrifice the individual for the sake of the greater number? Because then you're not really catering for, individuals' needs and wants. We're not a society, we're not a group. So if you're going to plan for, 65 million people, you're sacrificing individuals' needs and wants. And again, you're going to be faced with a serious issue, but you can really tell that they're bastardising the entire meaning of socialism, because socialism is central planning. That's what socialism is.
For people that may not need this thing, or they realize that they may need that thing. And so by this point, you'd have by that point you'd charge people on what they actually consume, rather than what they wrote on their list. However, I imagine a similar type of solution can be made without having to.
But if you're making that decision on consumers' demand, that is capitalism. That's what capitalism is. You're leaving it down to the market. You're leaving it down to consumers to shop around for what they want, for consumers to determine what prices are. You're essentially defining capitalism. That's what you call leaving the market be to regulate itself, for consumers to regulate what they want. That's essentially what it is. So, my God, man. They just don't get it.
Sound like a market whenever I try to explain it. And with this, it kind of solves I guess main problems that I feel like you noticed. Because by the planning process, we managed to like cut out most of the competitive problems and most of the whatever problems with markets, while also allowing for the flexibility of markets.
I don't know how competition could be seen as a problem. Competition was what incentivized businesses to improve. It also incentivized change. Again, Thomas Sowell gives excellent examples of this in the business section of his book on basic economics. You take, for example, there was a businessman, and he didn't really want to make any changes or that. Just the sort of incompetent. He wasn't really the most competent sort of businessman. I think somebody left that company. I don't know if it was JP Morgan or whatever the company was. I can't remember what the company was. I'd need to reread that. But he left the company, and I think he started up his own company in competition, and he ended up, I think it was Sears or something, he ended up creating, and that company ended up growing to become more successful than that businessman, right? That's the purpose of competition. It strives to improve business, and who benefits for that? The consumer. He's trying to pass off, competition as if it's something of a negative, and it really isn't. That's the very reason why monopolies are so, they're monopolies haven't got competition. It's part and parcel of the problem that they're faced with. The incompetence, in other words. There's no competition to boot them up the backside, so to speak. So that kind of explains that.
By letting people actually go out and get what they need by that point. So that's my general answer. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. The economic calculation problem just kind of relies too much on the market as like an overall like value of humanity. That's as far as I'm able to understand.
Here we go again, man. You see this the value of humanity, whatever that's supposed to mean. It's that argument, to simplify it for you folk. He's basically saying that, well, the market puts a price tag on people, right? Basically puts a price on people. But it's just like that example that Thomas Sowell gives, where he says that you remove the price, then what you're ending up with is, as a result of that shortage, you end up creating a serious problem, because there's no proper way to ration. So in other words, the 12-year-old lassie gets put before people with more urgent needs, such as the cancer patients, etc. And that happens. They think it's just a case that you could simply just remove a price and that would fix a problem. You could easily fix that problem. No, you can't. It's the very reason why the NHS has been faced with that problem for decades. That's the truth. That's the God's honest truth. If that was the case, they would have solved that problem with the NHS in the 1950s and have not been able to.
Okay, so a few things I can, I guess, pick at a bit when it comes to the grocery list thing. Once again, I would probably need to, read, a more substantive, proposal for the small, because, of course, you can't be, I suppose if you were to go into all of the intricacies of your model, you probably have to need, 3 hours, I guess, to dispose this.
Yeah, we'd be here for hours here.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the
it is a simplification, but that's the general idea.
All right. Yeah, so a few things I can just notice right off the bat that I guess, or would be inquiries that I had, is things like, for example, the grocery list. This would be very dependent on, number one, it's very heavily reliant on a form of overreaching logistical system of some sort that is able to process all of these grocery lists from the entirety of the population and put them together into a coherent list and send them off to all the relevant departments and have them processed and have them produced in that sense. I mean, we can see now things like, for example, during elections, which would be a fairly comparable situation, but a lot more, complicated, because with elections, you sort of you write down a person, it gets sent in, it gets counted, it gets sent to like one institution, sort of counts the votes, bang, there you go, they make the decision through that way. But through grocery list, it's like a list of multiple things and quantities and amounts. There's a bigger time investment on the side of the person making the grocery list. It has to be processed and sent out and aggregated and sent out to all these different departments. It seems like a very heavy logistical task. And we see right now that a bunch of different nations like still have troubles when it comes to like effective logistical planning of like elections, and these things can take like days or even weeks to fully count. So that's one of the things that like the grocery list is kind of worse than the market, because market is just, it kind of like price signals are very efficient in that way.
I admit I managed to somehow leave this out, but when it comes to like the aggregation of all of like the grocery lists, I guess we're calling them by this point, is there's an institution called the Iteration Facilitation Board. This kind of acts like the pseudo market for participatory economics. They get all of the grocery lists and then they like aggregate it all into like prices and whatnot, along with the the workplaces requests, and then they help like make like 5 or 3 or whatever final plans. And just in case there's any worry of bureaucracy around here, these people don't make any like major decisions. They don't like decide whether to inflate one price or the other, and they don't decide for everyone which plan everyone's gonna follow. So just clarification.
Yeah, and then that's what I meant, how like to go into really like the nitty gritty and adjust all these like logistical things, you would need like hours upon hours of like conversation, discussion, and research and stuff like that. Those are like that's one of the.
I like to mention, I'd be glad to talk about participatory economics at like a later point. We could talk about it more in depth and talk about like the benefits and whatever.
I mean, probably. We will have time for. I'll say I'll probably need a whole stream for that. I have a bunch of other stuff planned, so I need to get to that. And and what I was going to build off of that,
I'll let you study.
Wonderful. Off of
I'll let you study for your stream.
The logistical issues, like things like, for example, like how frequently you were to make people do these grocery lists and stuff like that, and like planning of like large political events or large trends that may occur like right before one of these grocery lists or right after. It just seems really complicated and seems a lot more just there's more things that can go wrong than like just like a price signal.
The serious problem is with food is, number one, you've got a sell by date. That's a very, very serious problem that they're faced with. And like I said, folk, I mean, in terms of prices, it's got nothing at all to do. Leaving prices to the laws of supply and demand, that's capitalism, in other words, right? I don't know where this boy's going with, right? He tried to say you can refute the economic calculation problem, but he clearly doesn't understand what the economic calculation problem is. The economic calculation problem, in short, stems from control over prices, controlling prices above or below market value, destroying the information of profits and losses, and causing resource misallocation, right? That's essentially it with regards to the economic calculation problem. And that's a very serious problem when it comes to food, because it's not just a case of, again, sacrificing the individual for the sake of the collective, all in the name of voting. I mean, you could hear it there where they're speaking about voting, like as if it's just a case of, well, individual communes, because I think this is going down this road or whatever, right, where you plan for the collective, but there's an issue. Individuals all have different tastes. We're not a group. We don't all like the same stuff. And some families tend to use more of something than other families. Again, Kevin D. Williamson used that perfect example where he says, a specific family might use more milk for the sake of, whipping up a bunch of ice cream, or they might use a lot of it for the sake of, breakfast or tea or whatever it may be. So they might actually buy more milk than other families, and this is what you're faced with. And then you've got people who are lactose intolerant and all the rest of this, right? So you need to work out how much you're going to plan in terms of production of milk, right? It's not as simple as just saying, well, we'll just produce this amount. But how do you know that information without the information of prices? You need market-driven prices to tell you that information. If you've no got market-driven prices, which is capitalism, you've no got any information there to tell you that. I mean, you imagine trying to plan out production of milk for millions of households across the whole of Great Britain. Never mind the United States of America. Fuck me. You could probably fit Great Britain inside New York. Imagine trying to plan for 300 million people in the United States of America. All you can say, no chance. No chance. And what I'm getting for all this is, it's a very confused argument that they're making. Both of them are completely lost. They don't understand, things that they're speaking about. I mean, this boy, I'm pretty sure his name Rose Wrist or whatever, he doesn't seem to understand that he's actually speaking about capitalism. He doesn't get that. he just that's what capitalism's about. It's about leaving it down to the market. He just doesn't get that. Don't worry, folk. I'll see your comments in a second.
The planning process goes through multiple rounds, mainly to help make sure that there's nobody's asking for more than they need. Nobody's asking for all that nonsense. It goes through multiple rounds, and then once everyone agrees on a basic plan after those rounds,
everyone agrees upon it. What do you mean everybody agrees upon it? So you mean to say that an individual should sacrifice their needs and wants when it comes to food for the sake of the collective?
You have the IFB making the variations of the final plan.
Yeah, but do you see now where I'm coming from? How there are all these caveats, and there's all these different large structures, which the more different moving parts you have in a production sequence, the more things can go wrong, and the less efficient things typically get. So that's sort of the argument that's being laid forth by this economic calculation problem, right? It's saying that for a planned economy to operate as efficiently as a market economy, it's harder to make that happen. And as such, on an aggregate, it seems that it's more likely for planned economies to be less efficient than what market economies are. And even if you don't concede to this, the things you mentioned before, how this is so heavily reliant on what type of planned economy we're talking about.
Is this boy even a socialist?
Means that it already directly applies to a whole load of different planned economies, more command type economies, I would assume you would say. And as such, the issue you would have in the economic calculation problem isn't necessarily that the argument is bad, but more so that you believe it doesn't apply to your model of a planned economy. And those are two pretty different things.
No, it's not that. On the topic of whether participatory economics, for example, is more efficient or less efficient than markets, there's already a political economy, participatory economics. It already goes into depth about the proof that they use in order to figure out whether or not Paracon is better than markets or central planning. And I like to mention here, because it feels like it gets into more of it's complex thing, which I feel like I should probably add. Just because something is complex doesn't necessarily mean that it's terrible. Of course it's complex. You have to make sure everything's moving in right parts, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's more undesirable than a market system, which just has you buy, I sell, or something like that.
Yeah, that was
Yeah, I
not
just like to
quite
mention that.
the argument I was making. I was saying, I wasn't saying that just because something is complex it's inherently bad. I'm just saying that on an aggregate, it may seem or it may play out that a more complex system, a more multi-partied production process is likely to be less efficient than what a market and what price signals are as an aggregate. Now, of course, when you're talking about a specific model and you're able to weigh the examples of a market price signal model versus whichever planned economy you may prefer, and you look at them side by side, then that argument may be like irrelevant or whatever. But when you talk about just like as an aggregate, the more moving parts is and the more complex it is, then it's more likely that this will occur. Whereas if you're comparing two different models, you would have to say, okay, this thing's complexity is causing this inefficiency, not just it might do this or yada 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 and stuff like that. So that's sort of like the key difference that I would believe, and why I believe that. Just like it's still something that would probably occur on an aggregate.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that it won't occur. Again, like if we're talking about especially central planning, I find that like if you don't have like the specific right type of like ways that like central planners can get the information that they need, of course it's inevitable that they're not going to get enough information. I'm not exactly denying that, but the thing is that with the economic calculation problem in itself is that it's just kind of too general, I guess I could say. It just focuses on planning rather than central or decentral or this specific system or that
Yeah, I mean
system.
it's like most arguments, right? You need to understand where they apply and where they don't. I still think that the economic calculation problem is a valid argument for discussing and criticizing certain models, and for some of them it may not be a valid model. But
no, it's applicable to socialism completely and the mixed economy. You see, this is the issue that they don't understand. Yes, Ludwig von Mises had made the argument against central planning, but Ludwig von Mises wasn't just applying that solely to central planning. It could apply easily to that of, without for example, the Marxist theory of a moneyless, classless, stateless. Ludwig von Mises was speaking from the perspective of what socialism is in practice, right? For what you're never going to avoid. That's just socialism in reality. But what the economic calculation problem is something that you're faced with because you've destroyed the information of profits and losses. And the only way you're going to get that information is capitalism, basically leaving the market be for prices to be freely determined by consumer demand. The market is in relation to do with capitalism. Socialism's the complete rejection of the market. That was Ludwig von Mises' critique of socialism, because socialism will inevitably destroy the information of prices. It's inevitable. Through either the price controls or even trying to go down the road of a moneyless based economy, because what does a moneyless based economy mean? It simply means you've not got the information of prices, right? There's no money, there's no prices. If there's no prices, there's no information of profits and losses. So how then do you know, in a vast economy with millions of different products out there on the market, how do you know how much to produce, what resources to use, where you're allocating them, etc, etc. You really don't know any of that. That's the issue. It doesn't just apply, to a few things. You can even see it rife through all mixed economies. You can see that, with the public ownership. You can see that with the NHS. You can see it, even, to a varying extent in other areas. It's typical. You can even see that with regards to the roads the government had been running. So you end up seeing all the potholes all over the roads, etc. That's just an inefficiency.
But I don't think that has to do with the validity of the argument itself. I think it just has to do with an understanding of when to properly apply them or not.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Glad
it
we
was a
can
very
finally agree after all that nonsense.
yeah, exactly. Well, we got an agreement in the end. Yeah, thank you very much for calling in and discussing the economic calculation problem, giving me a
Yeah.
extra segment for my stream. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Also, hi YouTube.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do the Xanderall debate review, but before that, do you have any Twitter or whatever that you wanna drop a name for?
Not really. I just want to say, read For the People, by the People by Raman Hano. Very good book. That's it. Bye.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much for calling in.
So, I mean, that's pretty much the end of his, video.